You are listening to the Businesstalk podcast, a show that brings you conversation with global research scholars and academicians from around the world. I'm Deepak, your host from India. Today we are honored to welcome Dr. Valery Yakubovich as our distinguished guest on the podcast. Dr. Valery Yakubovich serves as the Executive Director of the Mack Institute for Innovation Management at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. At Mack Institute for Innovation Management, Dr. Valery leads initiatives that bridge research, teaching, and practice in innovation management. He cultivates collaboration between academics and industry leaders while strengthening connections with corporate and regional innovation ecosystems. Before assuming his current role, Dr. Valery held academic and consulting positions at leading institutions such as the Wharton School, the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and ESSEC Business School in France, where he advanced research and practice in organizational innovation. His work on technological and organizational innovation and social networks has been widely published in premier journals, including Organization Science, American Sociological Review, Harvard Business Review, California Management Review, and MIT Sloan Management Review. His research has also received media attention from major outlets such as the Financial Times, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journals, and others. In today's episode, Dr. Valery Yakubovich discusses his research, A Brave New World of Human Resources Research, Navigating Perils and Identifying Grand Challenges of the GenAI Revolution. Now, without keeping you waiting any longer, let us warmly welcome Dr. Valery Yakubovich to the conversation. Dr. Valery, it's a privilege to have you with us today, and we are truly grateful for the time you have taken to be here.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for such a detailed introduction. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Professor, the paper calls Gen AI a revolution for HR rather than just another technology wave. If you had to explain to a skeptical CHRO why this is fundamentally different from past HR technology, what would you say?
First of all, I would like to clarify this paper. You did not mention it has, if I'm not mistaken, about 15 co-authors, right? So it was something we wanted to put together very quickly, based on practitioners' input, kind of as soon as the technology emerged, generative AI, at the end of 22. It took us about a year to kind of organize our action. Then we had a practitioner conference in early 24, and then we published an article in early 25. Of all these years, as we've been working on this, the generative AI's technology has been changing fast, right? It's a moving target. So for me, like your request or invitation to join this podcast immediately was kind of a nice occasion to revisit what we've done and see how much has changed, right? But a few things start staying the same, even going back prior to generative AI. The first paper I co-authored with my colleagues Peter Capelli and Sunny Tambe on AI in HR was published in 2019. It was based on the previous generation of AI, which is we call discriminative AI rather than generative. And many things we said there, they're still valid. They've not been done, right? It's very hard. So why is it hard, and why is it a very different technology? Going back, there are a lot of things to say, but specifically about generative AI, if you think how traditional technologies work, right? What is a technology? I define it as knowledge embodied in tools, right? Knowledge brought into practice. And how have we done it over centuries, right? You have a very specific input into your machinery, right, into your tool. You know how the tool operates, and you know what you expect to receive as an output, right? And the output can be measured, assessed, quality control. So you are kind of in control of the whole process. What do we have with generative AI? Broadly defined, right? The input is anything. The machinery itself, no one knows, even its designers don't know how it operates. It's a black box. We know basic principles, but there is no clear algorithm there, right? And the output is anything, depending on how you structure, how much variance, you can control variance to some degree of the output, but the same question might get a totally different answer and totally inaccurate and inadequate answer, right? So that's the difference. I would say we are not dealing with technology as knowledge embodied in tools. We are dealing with raw intelligence, right? And that's what makes it so complex and in many ways scary, if not threatening, right?
Dr. Valery, you identify 6 core themes from the 2024 summit, from Gen AI's disruptiveness to the critical role of CHROs. Which of these themes most surprised the executives in the room and why?
Well, first of all, I should say that we organized that summit in early 24 not to give any kind of insights from us to executives, but solicit their thoughts, right? The whole idea was a year passed since generative AI emerged. What are you doing at your organizations, and what kind of experiences you face, what you are dealing with, what are you thinking about doing going forward, right? So we solicited their information. It's kind of a, if you want to say, kind of a raw data for our analysis in the paper, right? And so, in that sense, I could say what I was, maybe a better way to start answering these questions, what I was surprised listening, and not just surprised, shocked, learning from executives. Right? Think about it. We talked, it was the early 24, so roughly about, I would say, almost 20 years since the emergence of data science as a major topic, right? For the industry managers, practitioners. Um, Everyone knew at that already point, you have to have your data in order to proceed, use data for your practical purposes, right? Better use of data, analytical use of data. Then machine learning emerged. It also requires high quality data. It turned out in our summit, we noticed this big split. High tech firms claim, at least, right, what we learned from them, they are very comfortable. They organize their data, they know what they are doing. Non high tech firms are still far away from even having their data structured, organized, connected, right? There are a lot of silos. Finance control their data, HR control their data. The quality of the data is not known, and many managers are just afraid to touch this data and put it into any algorithms, right? Because we need the high quality data. That's the starting point, and it wasn't there, right? So that's one reason why in our paper and some other publications of mine and my colleagues, we argued it will be a long way to go before these technologies really make a huge difference in organizations, right? So what was, going back to your question, as the conversation evolved, what executives were kind of surprised to learn, again, I would say more brick and mortar kind of businesses vis-a-vis high tech. High tech was teaching the others what is going on and how to use these technologies. And for example, one high tech, very well known high tech company announced they were going to create digital twins for their employees because now it's possible. That was shocking, right? And we were quite skeptical, said it's not going to happen that fast. At that company, there was a CHR officer talking to, they had already high-tech engineering person assigned as a technology officer for the HR unit. And the technology person said, I want already this year in 24 to introduce digital twins. The chief HR officer said, wait, let's wait until 25, right? Now we're in early 26. We know there are no digital twins yet, right? But this kind of high expectations of technology folks and enthusiasm and push vis-a-vis, managers, in particular in non-high-tech companies, there's a big lag. And that's what we see, a lot of inertia, a lot of very slow, painful process of this innovation and adjustment. So that's probably the main, there's kind of a split between this. It was also surprising for the whole audience. Yeah.
Professor, the article argues that organizations will increasingly compete on data in HR. Can you paint a concrete picture of what HR in a data rich versus data poor company will look like 5 years from now?
Well, first of all, I already told you what I realized, where we are now, and maybe some progress was made since then, but I'm not sure that how bad most organizations are with organizing, structuring, connecting the different data sources, and curating their data so they know what is high quality data, what is poor quality data, right? So, and it's been almost 20 years since data science emerged, right? Now you're asking me 5 years from now, I'm not very optimistic, honestly speaking. Now, the danger is that for generative AI, you don't need to prepare your data structure, organize, and so on, right? You can feed there whatever you have. Unstructured data, these generative AI LLMs can process that data very easily. But garbage in, garbage out remains the same truth, right? If you don't know, like let's say you want to train your LLM to produce reports, marketing reports, strategy assessments, scenario planning, you feed in your previous documents, strategic documents, scenarios, whatever you'd like to give to the model, it's all doable. But if you don't know, if you feed in everything, you don't have a rigorous process for assessing the quality. And quality is hard because we don't have ground truth, right? It's not something simple yes or no answer. So you need to develop a process. You need to set up the system. So my expectation is that basically all these things will be driven by vendors, right? Most companies now put their data on the cloud. Companies like Amazon AWS and others, similar cloud services, they'll be giving tools, uh, kind of access controls and other mechanisms necessary to organize, process, and use your data with generative AI. And whatever they'll be shaping organizations, right? The reality is some of my colleagues call for uh, more in-house development of generative AI tools. The reality is it's expensive, it's very complex. Most organizations, in particular not high-tech organizations, will be using the tools that these cloud services will give them. And so this is where we should pay attention, how well they are dealing with companies' data, how they preserve privacy, confidentiality, how they structure access. Because even within the same organization, you can train a huge model to answer any questions, but not all employees are supposed to get answers to all questions, right? So there are a lot of these challenges. So it will be on the shoulders of cloud services to organize and help companies to transform themselves, identify good quality data, and use it productively. Uh, it's very hard what we learned from the previous 20 years.
Professor, adoption challenges and algorithm aversion emerge strongly in your findings. What have CHROs learned about building trust so that employees see Gen AI as a partner rather than a threat?
Yeah, again, when we had this conversation, it was a very early periods. CHR officers are still kind of digesting what's going on. Uh, so I should say first that algorithm aversion, that research which we cite in the paper, it goes back to the previous generation of AI, right? Pretty much what I call discriminative AI, machine learning models that predict, for example, whom to hire, right? Who might leave your organization. This is how that AI was used, uh, I would say, 10 years ago, right? And until very recently, until 22, from let's say 2014, 15 until 22. So that was algorithmic aversion, like pretty much there are experiments done where people were shown the assessments or predictions, for example, done by AI versus humans, and which ones employees were more likely to accept, right? With generative AI, it's not so algorithmic. Generative AI for employees is basically a conversation partner, co-pilot or teammate, right? And I was shocked actually to learn from multiple experiments how quickly people accepted generative AI or large language models as mentors, um, coaches, psychotherapists, right, and so on. So what we are learning that actually people don't have aversion to these bots, right? They engage with them, they interact with them, sometimes get attached to them emotionally, which is actually not such a great idea in general, right? So I would not say that algorithm aversion is on the agenda now. It's not a big deal. In fact, even before generative AI, we saw some research. I published a paper a while. It came actually out very recently, but the first draft we wrote back in 22, I think, where we noticed that uh, people indicate they prefer uh, robots or bots as HR officers, right? Because a lot of employees are very unhappy how HR services them. That's why we see like a major application of generative AI is in HR operations. Because people can talk. If a bot is trained properly on the company's regulations, rules, HR policies, then the bot is available 24/7 to answer any employee's questions. So a lot of companies experiment with that. But even in 24, at our meeting, some HR officers were very concerned about it because if your bot hallucinates and tells an employee something different about pay policy or vacation policy, you have to kind of meet the expectations that the employee formed on the basis of the AI response, right? So in that sense, this is a kind of, I would say, not so much algorithmic aversion, but reliance on this generative AI. It's an opportunity for HR officers. It's a challenge at the same time, right? So I should say this. That's kind of adoption challenge where there are potentially a lot of benefits of using AI for organizing information, which is there is a ton in HR, providing better feedback to employees, helping managers write these performance evaluations, helping HR officers write job descriptions. And actually, already in 24, we noticed one application is the use of AI to generate candidate-specific questions for an interview, for example. So you can do much more customized service, which this is the opportunity. Because we don't need many more decisions in HR. We need better decisions, right? You don't need to scale. You don't hire many more people. You might end up hiring fewer, actually, as a result of AI adoption. But you need better quality decisions. So all this information processing, this huge amount of information, we're learning how to use generative AI for those purposes. But to build trust, going back to the second part of your question, there are three ways to kind of promote AI adoption, right? One is bottom up, where you give these tools to employees, tell them to use it, and celebrate good uses, right? There is plenty of research that shows that people use it secretly rather than for their own purposes, writing a document, but they're hesitant to tell their managers that the document was written in collaboration, let's say, with a bot, right? So you have to create an atmosphere by celebrating the successes, promoting the best practices, so people aren't afraid to say that yes, we are using right AI. It's one thing. The second, top down, right, where the leadership shows the direction, is explicit about where you want to take it, and also show the example that they're using it themselves, right? I recently wrote a couple of papers in Harvard Business Review with my co-authors on the use of generative AI by boards of directors. Right? So this is where you need to start, at the very top. And we actually trained a board meeting where all participants were bots, right? So to show how far you can push this. Right? So by example from above and by setting up a clear strategy, And then in the middle, where bottom up and top down should meet, it's kind of um, explorations and experiments, right? Where both managers and employees get engaged and try, okay, let's use this tool. Some people use this tool, some people don't, see what difference it makes, right? Kind of a lab, creating a lab where you can experiment with this. So this idea, bottom up, top down, and the lab in the middle is promoted by my colleague Ethan Mollick, who is well known in this domain. And I think it's a very reasonable framework for building trust and building engagement.
Very inspiring. Dr. Valery, you emphasize an experimentation imperative, including the idea that 80% planned plus feedback is better than 100% planned. What does a responsible GI experiment in HR actually look like in practice?
Yeah, first of all, I should say that this part about experimentation in the paper was written by my co-authors, not my part. I would say even less than 80% can be planned these days, right? You have to stay really flexible, exactly because this generative AI is a moving target. Right? Talking about experiments, in fact, I mentioned already a paper I co-authored back in 2019 for the previous generation of AI in HR. We actually proposed for all these AI kind of HR outcomes, such as whom to hire, who might leave, um, uh, and kind of more like planning decisions and interactions using AI. In some areas, we can really set up very clean, randomized experiments, right? For example, let's say you have a very kind of a mass kind of job, let's say in call centers, where you hire a lot of people, there's a higher turnover, higher churning, or in kind of telemarketing sales agents, right? Where you can, the salaries are not that high. The stakes of making a mistake in hiring aren't that high because of also higher churning. Um, we propose in that paper to set up an experiment in which, let's say, you use some kind of model, you have your traditional practice, how you make decisions about hiring, and you can also specify just the bottom kind of, let's say, baseline criteria, satisfying criteria for hiring someone. Let's say you have to be literate, you should pass some kind of safety test, confidential, whatever, background check, and so on, and show some verbal skills, let's say. And then from the pool of the candidates who meet those basic requirements, you randomly select some employees, right, and hire them. And then you compare your current practice, machine learning model, uh, against the random recruitment, and see how people perform over some period of time, who stay, who goes, and make then conclusion. Whenever I presented that in my executive education classes and talked to practitioners, no one wants to randomize, which is kind of strange because the stakes are very low. And actually, some research in organizational behavior shows that people accept random recruitment as a fair practice under some conditions, right? You say, look, we have pretty much a pool of equally qualified candidates. There is nothing more I can say who is better, who is worse. Let's just try randomly. And by the way, it will also assure some protection against biases, right? Can give you additional information, right? So that's what I feel like is an ideal experiment. I highly encourage practitioners to try, right? And it's surprisingly how much resistance this approach faces in HR.
Professor, ethical risk, bias, privacy, and justice are a major theme. If you had to design a minimal set of guardrails every company should have before deploying Gen AI in HR, what would be on that list?
Well, these are very hard questions. Basically, the problem is that we have biases in our human decisions. And there's this huge literature on implicit biases, which now are actually experiencing this big pushback, right? In terms of our stereotypes, which might be related to gender issues, and race issues, and so on. now it's not a popular topic for discussion in the US at least anymore, right? Kind of accept it and don't blame people for those. But we need to deal with this. So the main problem, why is it so difficult? Because again, there is no ground truth, right? In our human decisions, even to train the models, we should give them some examples, but our examples aren't perfect, right? Humans continuously struggle with biases, and it's very hard to verify who is biased, who is not. What can be done? I mean, what I said before, this kind of randomization, is a helpful baseline if you dare to do it. And I think in some, mass jobs, kind of in some settings, it's possible, right? At least to start. Second, we need continuous audits, right? There are traditional ways, basically, at least in terms of legal aspects of discrimination, bias, and so on. There are clear procedures that have been tested in the court of law, what you need to have in place in order to prevent that, right? So you need to take all those processes, audits, and reinvent them for the era of AI, right? That's the second piece. And the third piece, you need to have human in the loop. There is no way. And fortunately, because here we don't, as I said before, we don't need to make a lot of new decisions. We just have to make better quality decisions. Human in the loop can handle all these things that are going to be done by bots or agents, right? So humans can be positioned in strategic, critical places. All decisions have to be approved by them. It's necessary for legal purposes, but I think this kind of dialogue and comparison between AI output and decisions and recommendations and humans, sometimes done independently and then compare it, will also inform. Like if we have a disagreement, we can give it a thought. Is it because someone is biased, right? So those are probably three things I would recommend, right? More experiments, randomization in appropriate way, um, audits, and human in the loop.
Professor, across the 6 HR domains, you analyze recruitment, training, performance management, job design, talent management, and compensation. Where do you see Gen AI delivering real value first? And where are you most worried about misuse?
Yeah, I would say, as I mentioned before, in all these areas, we have a lot of information to deal with, right? And so now we have a tool that can help us process a lot of information, structure, organize it, um, query a lot of information, and potentially improve the quality of our decisions. Where we see already a big difference in recruitment. We know that companies use generative AI to process big volumes of resumes, submissions, applications, right? That's good because in the past, HR did not have a physical capacity to really look closely at all these uh, documents, right? Now we have that capacity. We can pretty much, bots can pay attention to every resume submitted, even if there are millions of resumes, no problem. Of course, there is the other side of the medal because we need to make sure that models don't hallucinate. And by the way, what we started our conversation with, the idea that it's not a technology, it's intelligence, we see now a trend. In order to make it more manageable and controllable, we started kind of um, distilling these large language models into smaller models, which are specialized on a particular task, right? In that case, you can say, okay, I want a model which will be accurate with resume. So then input will be only resume, nothing else. The model will be more distilled, and then it allows us to explain better how it operates. There are techniques for doing so. And then the output will be, specific recommendation. For example, should this candidate, what are the key characteristics of this candidate we need? How well it matches the job description? Should we consider this candidate for the next stage, right? So by distilling the model, you make it more like a tool, more like a traditional technology, right? And then you can improve potentially the quality of your processing the resume. And you can process much more information, cover and find all promising candidates, right? So that's the good news. The bad news is that candidates also learned how to use generative AI, and we are getting now, companies get flooded by great resume, right? Which are much more difficult now than to understand. Are they real or are they fake, right? So it's kind of a war on both sides. We develop a new tool to process resume better. People, applicants adjust using the same generative AI to look better on their resume, right? Um, I don't have an easy solution to this, right? So it's as usual, as technology develops, we solve one problem, another problem emerge. But overall, again, in training, for example, or more broadly, learning, that's a huge tool, right? Because here it's all about organization of knowledge. As I said before, people like tutors and mentors, generative AI, which is available 24/7, right? So in learning, it's a huge breakthrough. I'm certain there's a lot that can be done by organizing training, giving people some kind of useful tips how to get their work done, maybe even in real time, on the job training, not only more formal training, right? So this is where it's all been going on. In performance management, I know that managers write resume using generative AI, write performance evaluations, giving feedback. It's helpful, but they need to be in the loop, right? They have information about the employee performance over some period of time. They can share it with the model. The model drafts something. Then the manager should go through and critically assess. But it's much easier than to write these things from scratch, right? So this is where I see a big promise, and it's being realized. Um, yeah, those are probably the main areas from the list you suggested.
Professor, the paper calls for use-inspired research that starts from practice rather than theory. How does this change what you think top HR journals and scholars should prioritize over the next decade?
Well, I need to clarify how use-inspired is different from applied research, right? Applied research really answers a practical question that someone has, right? It's more likely to be done by consultants, and it's less likely to be accepted into an academic journal, right? In a good journal, there's zero chance. Right? Use-inspired is different. You identify a practical problem, but it's still basic research in the sense that you look at the problem, you look at the literature we have, theories we already have, and say, well, current theories don't solve that problem. I need a new theory, right? But this theory is driven by a specific practical need. Because very often we academics develop theories by looking at the academic literature, saying, "Oh, this person said that, that person said that, no one said something else," right? And you start with theories and try to contribute to existing theories. We argue it's not enough. You start with a practical question, then identify that current research doesn't answer. And we have a lot of these questions now, in particular around the interaction between generative AI and humans, right? It's a totally new area. And so find a practical question about it and then develop a theory that answers this question. So that's how what journals should look for. You propose some kind of theoretical contribution, they always expect that, top journals. But is there a practical problem you're trying to solve instead of just talking to other theoreticians, right? That's how I would approach it.
Professor, you raised provocative questions about careers and expertise, especially in GI automates many entry-level learning tasks. How might this reshape what it means to become a star performer or a high potential leader?
I would say this notions of a star performer and high potential leader are converging in this context. In what sense? My prediction is that over time, all of us will be leaders. Only some of us will be leaders of humans and AI agents, and others will be only leaders of AI agents, right? First, you'll start with your own job. For example, my job consists of a number of tasks. I can delegate some tasks already to an AI agent. Eventually, maybe all my tasks will be performed with AI agents involvement, but I'll be coordinating, orchestrating, and I'll be human in the loop, making decision when the job is done and can be, passed to someone else. So I think what we should look for, how people use these tools, how they can orchestrate their own jobs using generative AI for now as tools, but it's already quickly moving towards AI agents, which will be taking their own decisions, right? Or actions even. So how can you navigate, orchestrate, organize this? This is how we should identify promising people. And in fact, for entry-level jobs, my expectation is that, at the entry level, you'll be able to perform much more higher level tasks because you'll be kind of an orchestrator for these low level tasks, which used to be performed by humans, right? So at the entry level, people will be coming with, much more kind of knowledge, expertise, because they're assisted by agents in learning all that stuff and doing this.
Dr. Valery, before we wrap up, I have one final question for you. Your paper was published in spring 2025, but as you noticed earlier, AI is a moving target. How has the Mack Institute's agenda around AI and HR evolved over the last year? And what are the most interesting and important research questions do you see going forward?
Over the last year, I already mentioned, I wrote a couple of papers on board of directors, how they should use AI, right? More generally, I started paying attention to this topic of AI as a teammate. I've been teaching a course on teaming. It's kind of a specific approach to teamwork, which allows you to be effective in interactions not only with people with whom you've been working for a long time together, right, like in traditional teams, but more in a with diverse set of people from different countries. Companies become global. You need to learn how to team with people from other countries, other contexts, speaking different languages. So we have a set of tools for that, and I've been teaching this. Now I introduce AI is another teammate with whom you have to learn how to team, how to listen, how to speak up, how to give feedback to each other, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff around what changes in team dynamics when AI teammates become available, right? That's what I think is very interesting and very important. We recently actually had another event at Wharton around the introduction of AI in organizations, and I kind of looked at it just before our meeting to reflect on, what changed. What stays the same is actually the whole question about change, right? Everyone agrees that it's transformative, it's revolutionary, um, even if we understand that to really gain benefits and it will take time in organizations. So we looked closely, for example, how companies are trying to get benefits. One paper I published also in Harvard Business Review Online is about one of our corporate partners of the Mack Institute, RICO, that gave us access to their projects, what they're trying to do with AI. And we looked very closely how they really make these tools profitable, in their case, in the processing of huge amount of documents, right? And how difficult it is to really get a tangible profit margin from this, because there are huge kind of fixed costs which need to be developing these models, putting them in place, and the kind of ROI will take a long time to realize. Right? So that's an area very important, very interesting. Really, to see how these things are happening, how we can remove bottlenecks that prevent from gaining financial benefits. But we still argue that the main idea now is exploration, experimentation, and more kind of longer term benefits. This is what companies have to be ready for. So this kind of how to innovate in this, how to implement change, this is a big question which is being reanalyzed, revisited, and in the current context. Then leadership, understanding, and skills are critical, right? So we look how leadership get educated about this, because many people get confused. Oh, I have this bot. Okay, let's start using it. That's all we need. We need actually much more for organizations to have a really reliable technology in place, right? So there are tools that are rapidly developing as well, but leaders should be educated how much it takes to get it done. So that's another area for research, which is apparently kind of surfaced recently. And then what I told you about this kind of bringing together bottom-up developments and top-down. The dynamics, which is organizational dynamics, it's not a technological problem, it's an organizational problem. And how this power dynamics plays out, who are influences in the process, this is what we need to study. We need to make sure that people who have the right skills can play a role of this kind of connectors who transmit knowledge across the organization, rather than people who actually are afraid of this technology and create barriers to knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing, and building trust, right? So those are kind of a few areas where what we are going to explore going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Valery Yakubovich, for joining us this thought-provoking conversation on Gen AI and the future of human resources. I hope this discussion sparks new ideas about how we can harness these technologies responsibly to redesign work, develop people, and tackle the grand challenges ahead. We appreciate your time and thoughtful discussion today. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much for having me. All the best. Thank you.